So if you haven't seen my video about 1990, I highly suggest you go back and check that out. I go into my methodology for these watch projects and also discuss the kind of limitations that might place on my eventual output. All of those things remain true for this video, so check that one out if extensive, wordy disclaimers interest you at all. For the 1991 project, I created a watch list of 239 matches, 28 of which I could not find or source, which means that my conclusions for this video are drawn from 211 matches. Now, on to the video. '90 felt like such a major year. Across the wrestling landscape, there was such a clear demarcation between 1990 and the decade that came before. In the WWF, you had Hogan losing his first ever WrestleMania main event to the Ultimate Warrior in an attempted, if tepid, passing of the torch. In WCW, Sting finally overcame Ric Flair to become NWA Heavyweight Champion of the World. In Japan, Mitsuharu Misawa shot through the ranks to superstardom by defeating Jumbo Tsuruta in the main event at Budokan Hall. In so many ways, 1990 felt like it was setting the table for the decade to come. And that's what makes 1991 feel like such a step back for the wrestling world as a whole. Where 1990 pushed towards the new, 1991 saw a lot of wrestling companies fall back on what was already tried and tested. Take WCW. The year starts with Flair once again as the world champion and the Four Horsemen running amok. But the angle simply doesn't have the same kind of impact and magic that it did even in 1990. Part of that is just novelty wearing off, and another part of that is the cast of babyfaces isn't all that enthralling. You have Pillman and Sting, sure, but then you also have Giant Gonzalez hanging around for some reason. 1991 only becomes an even bigger struggle for WCW when Flair decides he's had enough, packs up, and heads on over to Vince. Speaking of Vince, Hulkamania reigns supreme once again in the WWF. It's definitely Hulkamania past its peak, but I actually enjoyed most of what I saw from the WWF for this project. Hogan's reign is actually a lot of fun, as his feud with Sergeant Slaughter, while politically awful, produces some really strong matches in the Garden. Meanwhile, you've got Mr. Perfect having an excellent Intercontinental Championship reign, ending in a well-beloved match against Bret Hart at SummerSlam. Then there's also the Rockers holding things down in the tag division despite never getting their chance with the titles. It's a good year for the Fed, but Hulk Hogan reigning over the year is still the safe and sound option, which only really gets shaken up by Flair arriving at the end of the year. That's not to say there were no attempts to work towards the future anywhere in the world. AJW continued to prepare a crop of young and hungry talent to eventually take over the top of the card. Of course, that has way more to do with AJW's mandatory retirement age, which means that they're on a faster booking cycle than pretty much any other major company in the world. Meanwhile, New Japan also placed a focus on uplifting younger talent. In particular, the Three Musketeers of Shinya Hashimoto, Kaiji Muto, and Masahiro Chono were given a lot of attention by the promotion, culminating in the first ever G1 climax, which saw all three of the Musketeers end the tournament with the highest scores in the field. That being said, Muto and Chono just didn't quite click with me as singles guys yet, and Hash just wasn't being given the same opportunities that the other two were. And through the whole year, it's still Tatsumi Fujinami with the IWGP Heavyweight title after all. So yeah, generally, a real mixed bag of a year. Definitely a step down from 1990, but there is still a lot to be celebrated. So let's get things rolling with... I mean, of course. 1991 for All Japan was about making bank with the cash cow that was the Misawa Jumbo feud. 1990 was a challenging time for All Japan, with Tenryu leaving essentially forcing Jumbo to fast-track the Super Generation Army wrestlers into the top tier of the company while shuffling the Triple Crown around with the Americans all year. It definitely felt like Baba was trying to find something that would work with Tenryu gone, and boy did he strike gold with Misawa versus Jumbo. With that feud firmly cemented at the top of the card, Baba rightly decided to just ride it out for the rest of the year now that things had stabilized. The company was on an upward trajectory, with the fans fully buying into the new star of Misawa, and Jumbo was once again at the top of the field with the Triple Crown title. Part of what made All Japan so great in 1991, though, was the company setting the stage for the next crop of stars. Misawa was a firmly made man after the win over Jumbo, but the rest of his stablemates in Super Generation Army were still mostly just supporting players. 1991 changes that, with Toshiaki Kawada arriving to the main event scene. It's fitting that Jumbo's final Triple Crown title defense of the year is against Kawada instead of Misawa. It signals that there's much more to the native heavyweight scene than just Misawa and Jumbo. Another thing that I really loved about All Japan in 1991 is that they feel much more like a tag team promotion. Part of this is because there's only 4 Triple Crown title matches all year, with the World Tag Team titles taking very prominent main event slots on the calendar. Even the June Budokan show, one of All Japan's most important events of the year, is headlined by a pair of singles matches specifically meant to further a tag team storyline. Add in the fact that the year is littered with amazing Tsurudagun versus Super Generation Army tags and six-mans, and there's a very real sense of the two factions jockeying for control of the company. Even in a year where the company isn't really innovating anything and is clearly biding its time before unleashing bigger and better payoffs down the line, All Japan still succeeds as the must-watch promotion anywhere in the world. It's the company having the best matches the most often, with some of the best talent the world has ever known. Second year in a row, All Japan takes the win. And I'd hazard an educated guess that this won't be the last time either. Outside of All Japan's main event scene, it wasn't a particularly great year for tag teams. While one could reasonably slot in Kawada and Misawa, or maybe even Jumbo and Taue into this position, those entities get most of their work done in six-man tags. But those teams are also bogged down by having to spend significant amounts of the year working with the Miracle Violence connection, who are always a little bit hit or miss. The Steiner brothers, however, spent their year facing off against top talent in both the States and New Japan, and always did so strictly as a tag team. Aside from Scott having to take time off in the second half of the year, these two were inseparable and made their names and reputation specifically off of being a tag team. As great as the All Japan teams were and as much focus as they got, they're very much just vehicles for the single storylines that the company was building towards in the long run. The Steiner brothers are as close as you can get, bonded by blood and a love for tossing people around with absolutely insane brute strength. The tag team of the year. No deep reasoning for this one. 4 guys working at an insane pace, doing a bunch of cool power moves and not stopping until the match is over. It's a banger with awesome looking moves, and sometimes that's all you really need. The Steiners were particularly good for matches of this type. Low substance, but high flash. With just enough flash though, you can still be one of the best matches of the year. A real hot television tag that devolves into a heated brawl. I mentioned this in the 1990 video, but when given the chance to let loose, Genichiro Tenryu feels like the absolute best wrestler in the world. He's just an uncontained badass, incredibly violent and forceful at his best. Towards the end of this match, chairs get involved, and the violence reaches a real fever pitch that makes you can't wait to see the eventual Tenryu vs Yatsu singles match. This is even better than the eventual singles match for my own money. Check it out. I've done my fair share of complaining about Stan Hansen on this channel, but when he's on, he's one of the absolute best ever. He also has some insane chemistry with Kenta Kobashi. These two are just magical together, and this is one of their first really great matchups together in Budokan Hall. It's fast-paced and hard-hitting, and Hansen ramps up the violence in really great ways in the finishing stretch. There are some spots here that just make me wince, notably Hansen slamming Kobashi knee first into the barricades. Gruesome stuff, and a hint of even more greatness to come from these two. Bring back this New Japan, please. Jushin Liger and Norio Honaga wrestle the match that Jay White should be having way more often, but New Japan won't let him. Liger is a superhero, and Norio Honaga is an absolute scumbag. He takes every chance to cheat and pushes Liger to the point of trying to play Honaga's dirty game. And you know what happens when Liger tries to get into Honaga's world of scumbaggery? He loses. He's punished for betraying himself and playing into his opponent's strength. A fantastic, bloody tale about staying true to yourself. No Trios match in CMLL in 1991 felt like it meant more than Los Brazos versus Los Infernales. Los Brazos are the perfect Technico team. Charming and likable, brilliantly mixing physical comedy and traditional fast-paced lucha. Los Infernales, meanwhile, are just the best possible contrast. Evil, hateful brawlers in MS1, El Satanico, and Pirata Morgan. They are exactly the villains we need to make the Technicos shine here. It has all the classic Los Brazos bits, the footwork, the rowboat submission, and contrasting that with the punches and violence from Los Infernales makes this just the ideal clash of characters and styles. Because of the pandemic, we've all had to suffer through the tiresome discourse and creative rise of cinematic wrestling. If you want a better look into this idea and concept, I highly recommend checking out Colette Aran's article, Professional Wrestling is Already Cinema Losers. I'll leave the link in the description below. All this is to say that the best match that I feel captured the aesthetic and sense of being cinematic that I've ever seen was this 1991 exploding barbed wire cage match between Atsushi Onita and Tarzan Goto. This is a beautiful study into how the production and visual presentation of wrestling can compensate for weaknesses of the match itself. It's also a really great match to show how things being attempted in 2021, both cinematic matches and large-scale deathmatch spectacles, were pretty much perfected 30 years ago. If we're going to talk bell to bell, this match is fine at best. It doesn't even properly build to a climactic explosion. It's a few bangs in the first two acts, supplemented by a big, typical move finishing exchange stretch in the third. But the look of this match, the feel of it, the darkness of the arena, the crane shots of the cage, the subtle visuals of the cage wires still burning after an explosion. There's a certain magic to these visuals that carry so much more weight than anything that Onita and Goto actually do in the ring. This is a match that demands to be experienced and evaluated as a whole. It's a wonderful thing to behold when it's done right. I cannot tell you how many damn All Japan tags and six-man tags were potential candidates for this list. That's just the absurd level of quality that they were hitting on a regular basis in the company at the time. With all those choices, many of them featuring the same rotating cast of 8 or 10 workers, it takes something really special to rise above the others and make it onto this list. This six-man gets onto the list for being possibly one of the best bullying performances from a trio ever. Fuchi opens things by talking trash and immediately wiping out an injured Misawa. Tsuruta-gun then go on to try and murder Tsuyoshi Kikuchi as Toshiaki Kawada desperately tries to keep the ship afloat. One of the more uniquely structured All Japan six-mans, and one of the more memorable ones for it. Pretty easily the best lucha title match of the year. These two have such wonderful chemistry together, and the smoothness and fluidity on display throughout this match is just stunning. This is just a delightful display of lucha libre executed by two masterful technicians. It's a display of skill and finesse that escalates into some really fun high spots for the finish. A real sense of competition permeates this whole match, and it remains riveting from bell to bell. I had never before seen an Esther Moreno match, but boy was she great in this. Just a real fiery babyface willing to square up with one of the most dominant and aggressive teams in AJW, Jungle Jack. This is a 2 out of 3 falls match built on heat segments from Jungle Jack and big flashy comebacks from Moreno and Toyota. There's blood, which always helps a good underdog story too. It's smaller babyfaces bumping for Aja and Bison. Hard to go wrong there. From the simple 2 out of 3 fall structure of the last match to a frenetic and heated brawl, AJW had a great year and a lot of fun stuff was happening up and down the card, but the feud between Aja Kong and Bull Nakano remained the pulse of the company. This match is no exception. Both teams put their hair on the line and they fight like they have everything to lose. The best women's match of the year. One of the great bully heel performances from Tsuruta-gun. Really think about the kind of scope that covers. Misawa comes into this match with a busted up eye, so Jumbo and Taue go after it relentlessly. They're so hateful, and the crowd is just so ready to boo them for the bastards that they are. Misawa gets beat up, Jumbo's a prick. It's a formula for success. One of the most famous Apuesta matches in Santito's career. I love the atmosphere of this match. The large crowd, the dirty ring, hell, even the little Santito vignettes that get mixed in if you're watching the original version of the broadcast. It all gives the match a sense of scale and importance. The fact that Brazo de Oro, one-third of the most charming comedic act of the year, is the vicious Rudo attacking Santito and ripping into his mask and nailing some great punches just makes this match so much better as well. Brazo de Oro bleeds so much here and bumps and sells beautifully for one of Santito's amazing fiery comebacks. Easily one of the most memorable matches in Mexico all year, and a show of Brazo de Oro's versatility as well as Santito's best qualities. This match was a shot in the arm for the year. Just quick and hard-hitting shoot-style action that doesn't let up. The day I watched this, I saw it after a good but lengthy Liger-Hase match, and the whiplash from that to this was crazy. Even without English commentary, the simple graphics on screen do a great job communicating the story of the match within the rules. Rope breaks and takedowns take points away, first man to lose all their points, submit or get KO'd, loses. Past all that, hard slaps and stiff kicks speak clearly in any language. There's so much energy in this match that simply could not be captured in anything other than shoot style. A ceaseless sense that the only way to capture victory is through your opponent. Great stuff. I've covered this one on Walking the King's Road, so check out that episode for a little more detail. With Misawa failing to capture the Triple Crown and being so beat up through most of the year, Kawada stepped up to the plate and made his own challenge against Jumbo Tsuruta. Their interactions had grown steadily more heated and intense throughout the year, and it all culminates in this match here. It's not spectacularly violent, but it is a great Triple Crown match that utilizes elements of what these two had been building through 1991. Kawada's aggression, his spite, and Jumbo's recent submission defeats. These all come to a head in this match. Another one that I've covered on Walking the King's Road, you guys know the drill. And another great entry in the Misawa is busted up and Tsuruta-gun bully him for it genre that was really prevalent in 1991. In this match, Misawa's nursing a busted up arm and it's pretty useless for most of the early goings before he's able to make a big comeback. Everyone plays their roles wonderfully here, and I love how the odds stack against the babyfaces before culminating in the triumph of Misawa making Jumbo tap out to the facelock. I've heard people mention that Misawa shrugging off the arm selling at the end does ruin this a bit for them. I can see that. I just don't think it was horrible personally, and given how banged up and busted up Misawa was for most of the year, it just felt like a nice strong moment for him to help rebuild some momentum. A delight of a Southern-style tag team match. The build to this features the classic angle of Anderson and Zbyszko injuring Barry Windham's hand, rendering him too injured to partner with Dustin Rhodes and challenge for the tag titles. Luckily, Windham brought along a mystery partner to replace him. The gigantic dragon mask and black hood are very on the nose if you know what's to come, but this is WCW in the early 90s. We've already seen foolish things like RoboCop and the Chamber of Horrors at this point, so if some rando in a gigantic plastic dragon mask was really Rhodes' partner here, I wouldn't have been overly shocked. That the dragon reveals himself to be Ricky Steamboat just makes this such a wonderful moment. It's great to have Ricky Steamboat back in WCW, and the heels react to his reveal in the best way possible. Arn in particular perfectly manages his pure horror to keep it just on the right side of realistic expressiveness. All of this is great enough, but once the bell rings, it's every bit the heated and exciting piece of American tag wrestling that you would want. Steamboat is amazing as the fiery returning hero, giving the heels hell, and Rhodes can throw haymakers with the best of them. Anderson and Zbyszko are the perfect stooges. They sell their asses off, and their demise here is so satisfying. This is the kind of emotional, meat and potatoes wrestling that WCW always provided at their very best. This match fucks. Plain and simple. Let's get the obvious thing out of the way first. This match is wrestled by 6 luchadors whose gimmicks and attire are designed to evoke children's cartoon characters. No, really. Los Thundercats isn't some coincidence of parallel thinking. This Rudo trio is directly based on the Thundercats cartoon. There's a very silly and colorful aspect to all of their designs, which makes the sheer violence involved in this match so much sweeter. It is upwards of 20 minutes of just pure, unbridled chaos. A wild and bloody brawl filmed on a shitty camera as the director and crew scramble to catch all of the craziness going on. No matter what it is you're looking at any given point, there's always the vibe that something equally insane is happening just out of your peripheral vision. It's a breathless onslaught of carnage from the word go. I'm afraid I can't give you guys much context here because this match makes it to the list for sheer atmosphere and content alone. When I think of what a major Trios Apuesta match should be like, this is what it looks like in my mind. Fantastic stuff. It's well regarded in certain circles, but if you haven't heard of it until now, I give it the highest recommendation. Seek it out. War Games is a match with a lot of smoke and mirrors. 2 rings, 2 cages, the entrance intervals, the submit or surrender stipulation. All of this lends it the idea of weight and scale and significance, but when you really cut to the core of what War Games is, it's an incredibly simple match. All those trappings, the rules and structure dictate exactly what the match should be in practice. Babyfaces constantly in an uphill struggle against the superior numbers of the heels. That's all there is to it. From there, you just need a talented set of guys willing to bump, bleed, and sell for half an hour. This iteration of War Games gets pretty much everything about this match right. It is bloody and brutal and so cathartic. There's so much going on here. There's Pillman with the babyface performance of a lifetime, coming in first for his team and holding his own throughout the entire match, always dishing out as good as he got. There's all of the horsemen, bleeding and bumping their asses off to pay for their sins. There's the Steiners, ragdolling everyone with their obscene power and athleticism. You might know about the finish from one of the very first Botchamania episodes. Sid destroys Pillman with a pair of gruesome powerbombs that knock the kid out, forcing Giant Gonzalez to surrender on the babyface's behalf. Watching this match, I honestly don't mind it. It emphasized the dangerous and unpredictable nature of the stipulation. It put over that careers were on the line here, and it kept everyone strong even though there's a slight sense of there being an anticlimax. The finish isn't enough to ruin the near-perfect half hour of action that comes before it, but it is just enough to keep it from the highest reaches of this list. I love this match. I've covered it on Walking the King's Road, so you guys know the drill. Akira Taue and Toshiaki Kawada go to war and have one of the last great bloodbaths in All Japan's history. Both men are on an absolute warpath, getting to each other before the bell even rings. There's chairs, there's legwork, there's blood, but most of all, there's an undying sense of urgency throughout the entire match. An unrelenting feeling of hatred that really elevates this into one of the finest brawls of all time. Absolute perfection. Probably the peak of the Super Generation Army versus Suruta-gun feud, all the singles matches included. Again, this is another match that I've covered in detail before, so check out my episode of Walking the King's Road for a more detailed breakdown of this match. What I'll say here is that this match remains just a staggering achievement. Nearly an hour of breakneck action with the underlying depth of one of the most defining rivalries of the 1990s. All 6 men work in perfect synchronicity here, bringing their character motivations to the fore in a masterfully structured and paced match. Standout performances? It's hard to pick just one. Perhaps the man who gets the most shine from this is Toshiaki Kawada. He's the highlight for continuing his rivalry with Akira Taue and stepping up to Jumbo to prove that he's just as much of a threat as Misawa. But on top of that, you have what feels like a career performance from Masanobu Fuchi. This is Fuchi at his meanest, angriest, and most spiteful. A hate-filled bully, stretching our heroes to within an inch of their lives, holding it all together, the powerful presence of Jumbo Tsuruta, every bit the bitter ace defending his position. This match is the perfect realization of everything started in 1990 when Misawa pinned Jumbo. A forceful struggle for the soul of the hottest company in the world, and a new generation of stars that simply refuse to be denied. The best match of 1991. This spot is always difficult to fill because it's more about who I leave out than who I actually slot in. There's a lot of people I considered for the number 20 spot. El Satanico, Manami Toyota, even Hulk Hogan. I could have made an argument for any of them, but in the end, Dustin Rhodes is the one that felt right. Rhodes' case is built almost entirely on the final quarter of the year. His tag team with Barry Windham and then later Ricky Steamboat does a lot to give him shine. But even in singles affairs against stunning Steve Austin or Bobby Eaton, he makes good. I think what ends up placing Dustin in this spot over the others is what he represents to his company, WCW. After such a contentious year, the focus on Rhodes and his budding feud with the Dangerous Alliance felt like hope. A return to form for a company that had just lost its biggest star. That's what it felt like at the end of 1991, at least. Not the best year for Ric Flair, as this comes at the height of his conflicts with WCW management, specifically Jim Herd. And that reflects on TV. Flair's not given much to do at the start of the year except for a nice standard War Games build that leads to one of the best matches of the year. By the end of the year, we see Flair pack it up and head to the WWF, where he doesn't quite thrive, but the change of environment and new opponents make for some really fun television. His MSG matches with Hogan, while not classics, are fun Federation-style matches that show that Flair was able to adapt to a lot of different stylistic changes, even just within the United States. A difficult year for Flair to be sure, but one that he continued to help shape by shining when he could. Having turned face at the start of the year, Eaton's definitely a bit out of his comfort zone during 1991. No tag formula, no Cornette at ringside, and yet, Eaton still shows up as one of the absolute best in the world. He has a belter against Arn Anderson at Super Brawl, and then a smattering of really good to great television bouts throughout the year. By year's end, he's back heel as he should be, and working with Paulie in the Dangerous Alliance, doing cool stuff like trying to break Ricky Steamboat's leg with a chair. A versatile and consistent year from one of the best. For a brief second there, it looked like WCW were really taking things seriously with Pillman. Consistent interactions with the Horsemen, being a highlight of War Games, all the pieces are in place for a Pillman main event run, and he's delivering with strong performances. But then they saddle him with the comedy yellow dog mask gimmick that just runs its course before Pillman comes back as normal. Lord knows how high Pillman might have gotten on this list if WCW had any actual sense of follow-through. probably the best heavyweight on the New Japan roster in 1991. Hase doesn't have a lot of major bangers to back his case here. What he does have, however, is a strong series of tag bouts partnering with the likes of Kensuke Sasaki and Kaiji Muto, and just enough strong singles performances to land him on the list. New Japan doesn't really wow me too much in 1991, especially with the Three Musketeers still finding their feet, but Hase was a strong presence that could be relied upon to deliver the goods. Atlantis had two of the best lucha title matches in Mexico for 1991. Both the matches against Emilio Charles Jr. and Blue Panther are showcases of the kind of clean, graceful, effortless wrestling that the very best luchadors can accomplish. He also had a handful of really strong trios performances as an exciting technico that could add some flair to any match. All in all, another great year from one of the all-time legends of Lucha Libre. While more and more talent continued to showcase their abilities in AJW this year, Aja Kong still remains one of the highlights. An intimidating, dominant bruiser, always ready for a scrap to toss around the smaller women on the roster. Her heated feud with Bull Nakano continued to be a key attraction, and her tag team bouts partnering with Bison Kimura as Jungle Jack always guaranteed fast-paced brawls with a lot of really brutal offense. The hair match against Kyoko Inoue and Bull Nakano is the centerpiece of Aja Kong's year. Losing at that point and having her head shaved only serves to fuel her anger and motivation, which she of course imposes onto the rest of the roster. I do wish that AJW had booked her to make a little more progress in her hunt against Bull, and Aja does kind of disappear from my watch list in the latter half of the year, but she always leaves an impression. It's clear that Aja is the heiress apparent to the throne, and in 1991, she continued to show why she holds that distinction. One of the few people keeping the ship afloat at WCW. It's noticeable that when the Four Horsemen dissolved due to Flair leaving the company, Arn continued to be a main fixture of the company's newest hot heel stable in the Dangerous Alliance. The guy is just that damn good. He is the prototypical Southern wrestling heel, tough and cocky on the outside, but always exposed for a coward in the long run. He's everything you want from a traditional American heel. He succeeds in tag settings like in The Enforcers with Larry Zbyszko. He works as a singles guy working against Bobby Eaton. There's just an authenticity to Arn that he's able to maintain while still leaning into the theatrics of big American-style wrestling. What a talent this man has. Arn could do it all, and do it all well. One of the greatest supporting characters in all of wrestling. I don't say that as a slight to Kikuchi, but more as a slight to all Japan. With Kikuchi firmly designated as a junior heavyweight, he was always going to be overlooked in favor of his larger stablemates. Luckily, nothing could ever stifle the magnitude and quality of Kikuchi's performances. Constantly thrown into the mix during Super Generation Army's Sarudagun tag matches, Kikuchi is the prototypical fiery babyface. The size differences between him and Jumbo and Taue are so clear, but Kikuchi never lets that deter him, and he fights back with the energy and determination you want from a top star. Of course, Kikuchi is not only fantastic on offense, but defense as well. At several points throughout the year, Jumbo Tsuruta makes it his personal mission to beat the man into the dirt, and it's so violent and enthralling every time. Kikuchi's bumping and selling is masterful. His smaller stature means that he can be tossed around by Jumbo and Taue, and his flexibility means that he can be stretched within an inch of his life by Masanobu Fuchi. In a year where the subordinate members of Super Generation Army were allowed to shine a little bit more than in 1990, Kikuchi always made the absolute best of every opportunity he was given, and quietly amassed a resume of excellent matches that would rival even those of the main eventers in All Japan this year. Masanobu Fuchi is a mean son of a bitch, and he doesn't care who he has to destroy to get his way. Another performer placed into a supporting role in the Super Generation Army Surudagun feud that gets to shine through his own individual performance. It's real close between Fuchi and Kikuchi on this list, as they're often working the same people for the whole year. Fuchi gains a slight edge in this list for having a higher ceiling for his own best individual performance. Something about that famous 426-man tag just lit a fire under his ass, and he came out swinging. Might just be the best performance he's ever had in his entire career, at least among the ones that I've seen. Fuchi also develops a fun little rivalry against Kawada that fills out the year nicely. That gives us a nice Kurikan match between the two that allows both men to display their abilities in a single setting. The two are just perfect for each other. They're both so spiteful and filled with hate in everything that they do. With Steve Austin yet to rise to the main event and superstardom, it's Fuchi and Kawada trading middle fingers throughout the year that sticks out in my memory for 1991. Fuchi is someone who made being cool and being mean look as easy as breathing. I like to talk about consistency and a full body of work when I discuss wrestlers on this list. It's a simple and tangible way for me to point to what a certain performer's achieved in a year to justify their placement. It's important for me when I'm constructing these lists. But sometimes there are things that can surpass that. Wrestling isn't all math and numbers. Other times, it's a gut feeling. And the gut feeling you get when Bull Nakano is on screen is that she's the baddest woman on the planet. The ace of AJW celebrates another year fully cemented as the IQWA World Single Champion, battering away all the rising stars coming for her spot. The centerpiece for her year is, of course, the established feud against Aja Kong. The hair match is a great way to keep the feud hot and establish Nakano as this insurmountable ace in the company. But throughout the year, Nakano was able to tangle up with a lot of the talent bubbling up on the roster, including Manami Toyota, Akira Hokuto, and Suzuka Minami. Through it all, though, it's Bull Nakano standing tall, carrying the company on her back into another year. The first truly great year in Kenta Kobashi's career. With Kawada and Misawa still at the top of Super Generation Army, of course Kobashi is relegated to a supporting role. Luckily, when you're playing a supporting role in one of the most consistently entertaining rivalries in pro wrestling history, that probably means you're gonna rack up a really impressive resume of matches by year's end. Kobashi is never the central focus of any of the Surudagun Super Generation Army matches. He is mostly relegated to absorbing brutal beatings and having his knee shattered for most of these matches. Thankfully, he's pretty good at that stuff. I honestly don't think I can ever get sick of seeing Jumbo or Fuchi or Taue just slamming Kobashi's knee straight into a wooden table. It's just one of those things in wrestling that brings joy to my heart. Outside of all the famous Surudagun Super Generation Army tags, though, there's actually a bit of a hidden depth to Kobashi's year in 91. He's able to have some really great matches partnering with Tsuyoshi Kikuchi and semi-regular partner Johnny Ace. Something like Billy Black and Joel Deaton against Kobashi and Ace in Korakuen Hall on July 18th is one of those fun little hidden gems that add a lot of flavor to someone's year. Yes, he's a sixth of the match of the year, and that does his case a lot of favors, but the real crown jewel here is the Hansen match in September. It's one of the first really exceptional Kobashi singles matches from one of his better opponents as well, and it's such an exciting glimpse of the kind of heights that Kobashi would reach down the line. He's not the star of the show, but when given the chance in 1991, Kobashi showed up. Watching Los Brazos rise through CMLL in 1991 was one of the most delightful things about the year. The trio of El Brazo, Brazo de Oro, and Brazo de Plata had been doing dates for CMLL on and off since the late 80s, but 1991 might be one of their most prolific and exciting years yet. There's just a real wholesome and endearing quality to them as a trio. They're such a finely tuned act with their own set formula and bits. While some might find their work repetitive because of this, it's not any more formulaic or redundant as the works of the likes of Ric Flair or Hulk Hogan, and succeeds for similar reasons to those two. The formula allows them to plug in a wide variety of opponents into the act while retaining the same level of quality and familiarity throughout. Los Brazos are just the best act in Mexico all year. Incredibly consistent and with a high quantity of good to great matches. Their particular brand of comedy just hits the spot for me personally as well. It never gets so silly that it goes out of its way to shatter the illusion of wrestling. It's lighthearted and it's fun, but when the time comes to turn up the heat and start wrestling, they're perfectly capable of doing that as well. One shocking thing I found out about Los Brazos through this run is that when called upon to do so, they could make really good rudos as well. Just see Brazo de Oro's iconic singles performance against El Hijo del Santo on January 13th, where he's a great rudo brawler in a bloody and weighty apuesta. Then there's also the September 27th trios from CMLL, where Los Brazos take on a trio of second-generation stars including Santito, El Hijo del Solitario, and Liz Mark Jr., where Los Brazos play the rudo role really well. It's a surprising amount of versatility that they achieve even as a mostly light-hearted comedic technical act. Still unconvinced? Watch Super Porky hit a dive with the kind of vicious, reckless abandon that men half his size struggle to muster, and tell me that they aren't a top 10 act in wrestling. Try it. I dare you. I'll wait. The best tag team of the year, mostly by process of elimination. If you want the classic chicken soup for the soul Southern tag team formula, you're not gonna get it in its best form with the Steiners. The teams that did that best in WCW just aren't around this year. The Midnight Express is broken up with Bobby Eaton turning face, the Rock and Roll Express are broken up with Richard Morton joining the York Foundation and turning heel. So with the two masters of the Southern tag gone, what we're left with is the two beef boys with the dope moves. Here's the thing about dope moves though. They can get over anywhere. Of all the acts involved in the WCW New Japan partnership that was such a big part of the year, the Steiners were the ones that benefited the most. With acts like Ric Flair, Tatsumi Fujinami, and Vader going back and forth between Japan and the States all year, it was the Steiners that really impressed on both sides of the world all year long. They start 1991 as one of WCW's leading babyface acts, going up against the Horsemen, which culminates in them being in the Great War Games match. From there, they're able to have fun showcases against teams in Japan, specifically in their series of matches against Hiroshi Hase and Kensuke Sasaki. Scott does get hurt for some time later in the year, and that does stunt their momentum as a team a little bit, but even then you have Rick coming back to Japan and teaming with Scott Norton to wrestle even more bangers. You're never gonna watch these Steiner matches from 1991 and look for intricate, layered psychology. What you are going to get are highly athletic and explosive displays of strength that rarely ever waste your time. And in a year where so many great tag teams just weren't present to hold down the fort, that's enough to get you into the top 10. This was a difficult one to rank. Here's the thing. On paper, Mitsuharu Misawa had everything you'd want from a top-level wrestler of the year. He's the top guy in his company, the centerpiece of the hottest ongoing rivalry in the world, consistently working against the company's top champion. He's a key part of the match of the year, he's able to win a major world tag team title, and he's in the finals of the Real World Tag League. In almost every way, this is a slam dunk year for Mitsuharu Misawa, and probably one that could get most any other wrestler into the top 5. And yet, Misawa sits here just outside of the top 5 because despite all those accolades I mentioned, he really feels like he's struggling in 1991. The big contributor to that is how much time Misawa spends in 1991 injured. You can kind of trace it to the World Tag Team title win against the Miracle Violence Connection, where Misawa seems to be coping with a bad allergy or cold of some kind during the match. During his big Budokan tag title defense against Taue and Jumbo, Misawa's dealing with an arm injury. Just a month after that, he suffers a really bad broken nose. By the time he gets into the Real World Tag League, he sustains a busted up eye. Now, I can't confirm how many of these injuries are in kayfabe or how many of them are legitimate. My own personal guess is that they're all legitimate and that the matches just pretty smoothly incorporate these real problems into their narrative. And sure, it's fun seeing Misawa have to overcome those injuries. They also do add really interesting new wrinkles into a formula that's pretty much been set in stone. But as a result, Misawa rarely feels like the driving catalyst behind so many of these great matches. But hey, he still has a hell of a year, one that most wrestlers these years would be envious of. The performance against Jumbo in the Triple Crown title match still rules. He's a great fiery babyface in the Budokan tag title defense, and he brings a sense of star power to all these tags that generally feature the same 8 people over and over again. It is, after all, Mitsuharu Misawa in one of the most revered periods of wrestling ever. A step down from his legendary 1990, but even a step down for Misawa lands him in the top 10 wrestlers of the year. As much as Aja was being groomed to be the eventual successor to Bull Nakano's throne, the most exciting female performer to watch in AJW was none other than Akira Hokuto. She opens the year with the biggest bang possible, having a fantastic action-filled and explosive matchup against Bull Nakano for the Triple WA title. She's put down in the end, of course, but it doesn't stunt her momentum for long. Just a couple of weeks after, she has a strong match against Manami Toyota, where Hokuto is once again nursing an injury. It makes for a great plot point, and Hokuto is just naturally sympathetic. Her drive to keep pushing past all injuries is as endearing as it is horrific, and it doesn't stunt her in the same way that it did for Misawa. The big story arc of Hokuto's year is, of course, the split of the Marine Wolves. She and former partner Suzuka Minami end up feuding over the All-Pacific Championship throughout the year. Aside from that, Hokuto also benefits from being able to tag with Bull Nakano, aka one of the coolest people in the world. With Nakano's dominance and Hokuto's unrelenting energy, they're a great pair to watch even in the very few times that I get to see them partner. On top of that, we have a lot of really compelling singles performances from Hokuto spread throughout the year. Great bouts against Aja Kong and Yumiko Hotta make for a strong complement to her other marquee matches for the year. In addition, what really puts Hokuto so high on this list is the kind of aura she was able to cultivate around herself and her work. Much like Dustin Rhodes in WCW, Hokuto felt like someone who had a very real, forward-moving momentum in a year where so much felt like it was going backwards. She cemented herself as a big player in AJW moving forward. 1991 is a really strong year for Akira Hokuto, which only makes it even more impressive that we haven't even seen her final form yet. The word superstar gets thrown around way too much in wrestling. You want to know what a superstar should be? Look at Jushin Thunder Liger in the 90s. Just a living, breathing, actual superhero. Larger than life, immensely charismatic, instantly likable. This is something made even more impressive by the fact that he wears a full bodysuit and mask. Jushin Liger's physical charisma is off the charts. He instantly connects with the fans in any room he's in, Whether it's the cozy familiarity of Korakuen Hall or the vastness of the Tokyo Dome, Liger demands your attention. Liger easily felt like the most important and worthwhile wrestler in New Japan all year. The company as a whole felt like it was in a state of transition and flux as they worked to put over the Three Musketeers in the heavyweight division. The thing is, at least from the matches that I saw, the Musketeers weren't quite there yet as polished and consistently reliable, high-quality main eventers. Add to that fact that Liger continued to be a wrestler far ahead of his time in both style and pacing, and you have a really strong year from one of history's all-time greats. Even as the babyface junior heavyweight ace, there's still a decent amount of versatility in his performances throughout the year. He can do a more fundamentally minded match against Akira Nogami, a spot fest sprint against Negro Casas, or a bloodier grudge match against Norio Honaga. One problem that Liger does face in 1991 is that he's a little limited to what he can accomplish because there's really no one in the junior division that's actually on his level. Even the foreigners like Owen Hart and Chris Benoit feel like they're not really operating at the same consistent quality that Liger seems to hit with such ease. There's a magnetism to Liger that just outshines his contemporaries. Watch any of his matches and the truth of things is transparent. You are watching one of the very best wrestlers in the world. Taue slander shrivels into silence when confronted by his work in 1991. Taue has a better 91 than two of the more beloved pillars in Misawa and Kobashi. He is probably the most consistent wrestler in the world for the whole year, having a lengthy list of great matches and performances spanning the entire period of time. There is no downtime for Taue in the year. He absolutely fills it with fantastic matches. He opens January with the brutal and bloody match against Kawada. I've talked about that match a lot, you guys know that I love it, and Taue is a big part of it. He's not at all being carried in that moment. He's as scrappy and aggressive as Kawada, and despite being part of the heel-leaning Tsurudagun, there's a certain valiance to his performance that makes him incredibly sympathetic. But there's another less famous match from January that illustrates Taue's versatility. Just a few weeks after the Kawada brawl, he has a sub 10-minute sprint against Misawa that ends with Taue putting over the debuting Tiger Driver 91. Taue bumps well and cuts a really quick pace in that match. For much of the early year, Taue could really be counted on to add a lot of substance to any match that he was in. I didn't know this before, but Taue bleeding was a pretty common occurrence for much of the early half of the year. In fact, it even allows him to play a sympathetic babyface in peril when he and Jumbo wrestle the Miracle Violence connection. Being able to seamlessly move between face in peril and a heat magnet against Super Generation Army showed how comfortable Taue was in either role at a fairly early point in his career. He did both exceptionally well all throughout 1991. In fact, I'd say that by around May or June, I would have no issue with saying that Taue was probably the best wrestler in the world. Things never really slowed down for Taue in 1991, it's just that other people get a few more opportunities that end up overshadowing what Taue was doing. But if we're talking about pure consistency of work from January to December, you'd struggle to find someone who could match Akira Taue. The ace of the hottest company in the world. I talked at length in the 1990 video about how Jumbo Tsuruda felt like the most important wrestler in the world whose actions mattered the most. That's no longer true in 1991. Don't get me wrong, it's not like Jumbo Tsuruda suddenly becomes a bad wrestler. Clearly not. He's one of the greatest of all time, and he's still sitting comfortably as the second best wrestler of the year. Here's the thing though, In 1990, Jumbo's struggle to cling to his spot as Ace of All Japan never felt more urgent. Without the Triple Crown in hand and having suffered a monumental defeat to Misawa in the Budokan, Jumbo actually had something to push up against and strive for. He had that extra spark of motivation to fuel the intensity in his performances. Unfortunately, that little extra spark is missing in 1991. Jumbo opens the year by winning the Triple Crown back from Stan Hansen, putting him right back up at the top of the heap. From there, not only does he win the returning champion Carnival, he also puts down his biggest rival by beating Misawa in a Triple Crown title match just days after. Most of the first half of the year plays out as Jumbo and Tsuruta-gun putting the uppity punks of Super Generation Army back in their place. And while I love Jumbo and Tsuruta-gun beating the crap out of our heroes, it doesn't really make for any kind of forward momentum. That's probably why the 426-man tag does stand out so much, as Super Generation Army's victory at the end feels like the babyface is finding their second win and pushing back against the odds. The same goes for the September World Tag Title defense. Jumbo being forced to tap out to Misawa feels so major and important as our heroes again knock the ace down a peg. Jumbo is so great throughout the year, but especially in the last few months when he's faced with a new threat in Kawada. It's when he's pushed that he really gets to shine, because that's when the fire in his performances really elevates itself. Even as the man at the top of the heap, Jumbo needs something to struggle against and aspire for. It also doesn't help things for Jumbo that as Triple Crown champion, he's only able to make 3 defenses all year. 2 of those 3 are great, of course, against Misawa and Kawada, but a nothing defense against Steve Williams in the middle of the year does a lot to stunt the momentum of Jumbo in 1991. A year that, again, had already been built around him being dominant and on top. None of this is his fault, of course. It's all a matter of booking and also that pervading sense in the larger industry that 1991 was a year of regression. And yet, Jumbo Tsuruta is amazing. That is a known fact. But it's also the status quo at this point. To be the wrestler of the year in a time of stability and sameness, you have to push back. You have to advance. You have to be someone who understands that the only way out is forward. The elevation of Toshiaki Kawada in 1991 is simply the best thing in wrestling all year. As Misawa's second in command with Super Generation Army, he's been on the periphery of the most important rivalry in All Japan. Of course, he's given his own material to work with though, as he continues his feud with Akira Taue this year. That results in the amazing January match. From there, it's a year that builds slowly for Toshiaki Kawada. He's still wrestling those Super Generation Army tags, but he's really just there to support Misawa. At least, that's how it starts. Through the early half of the year, there are suddenly rumblings of something much greater building up. He's taking the fight to Jumbo in these matches. He's absolutely fearless about throwing himself at the top wrestler of the company and trying to knock him down. By the time we get to the 426-man tag, Kawada completely snatches the spotlight for himself. The underlying theme of the year is still Misawa versus Jumbo, but one leaves the match of the year thinking of 2 fantastic moments centered squarely on Toshiaki Kawada. First, his rage-filled battering of Akira Taue, and next, his dogged attempts to tap out Jumbo Tsuruta. After April 20, there's no taking your eyes off Toshiaki Kawada. After the World Tag Title win with Misawa, Kawada is presented with even more opportunities to shine in order to compensate for Misawa's constant injury. This is where he truly makes the bulk of his case for Wrestler of the Year. In September and October, Kawada completes his transformation into the best and most important wrestler in the world. In the build to his Triple Crown title match against Jumbo, Kawada distinguishes himself as this aggressive and brutal competitor that could conceivably take the title away. More than just being a credible challenger though, Kawada spent 1991 completing his transformation into the persona that we all know today. Ruthless and violent, Dangerous K had arrived fully formed for us in 1991. I think one of the most important things to happen for Kawada in 1991 though is losing his Triple Crown title match. No one really expected him to beat Jumbo despite his feisty showings. And yet, that loss will begin a pattern that will come to define Kawada in the 90s in ways that no one in All Japan at the time could have known. It's the first disappointment that we as fans will feel for Kawada, but it will be far from the last. But there'll be more about that in the years to come. For now, celebration. Dangerous K. Toshiaki Kawada, the best wrestler of 1991. Thank you everybody for getting this far into the video. I want to send a huge shout out to my special guest editors, of course to the wonderful IQWrestler for his excellent title sequence, and to SamTheVAMod of the Sweet Chinwag podcast for helping me co-edit a lot of the video. Thank you so much. And of course, a huge thank you to my supporters on Ko-fi. Thank you to my one-time supporter in John Maynard, and to my monthly supporters in James Draper, Captain Jack Heartless, Eddie Roberts, Jacob Dickens, Matt Brummett, Chick Fritz, Spiders in My Bed, Tyler Kuhn Williams, Don Kiger, Arch Stanton, Timothy R. Buchner, In Delane, Kid Kingpin, Joe Humphreys, Henry, Christopher Jackson, Saltine Daltine, Peter Vinison, Dustin Faulkner, Edgar Molina, and The Four Pillars of Hell. You are all absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. Thank you for reaching the end of this video. You guys rule. Thank you, and have a good one.